Hi, I'm Cheryl Hodges and I'm going to show you how I painted this green metallic carpenter bee or Xylocopa aeratus. This one is a male, which is slightly different colouring to the female, and it's one of the larger native bees that we have in Australia. This presentation is a series of photos of how the painting progresses, and there is one video which will give you an idea of how I apply the paint. It's not a tutorial, but more an overview of my painting process from beginning to end. I'm starting with a pencil drawing. This is 2H pencil on 300 GSM hot pressed Arches watercolour paper. I start by using a lot of water and not very much pigment. So here I've done a very light wash of Windsor yellow and Prussian blue, which makes this beautiful limey green. I'm building up more layers. I wait for each layer to dry and then add another watery layer over the top. In this one, I've also added a small amount of French ultramarine to the bottom of the abdomen. I have the light deliberately coming from the top left, so there'll be a highlight towards the top left and shadows towards the bottom right. Now I'm mixing what I call a shadow mix, which is with French ultramarine and burnt sienna. Using that pale shadow mix, I've drawn in the segments of the abdomen. Here I've also added some more French ultramarine blue to the right-hand side. So from the top, the bee has a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. As I'm building up more colour, I'm also blending carefully into that white highlight. So I don't want to paint over that. I don't want to lose it because it does look better if it can be left as the paper glowing through rather than trying to add white paint on top. I'm applying that shadow mix to the right-hand side of the abdomen, just building it up slowly and blending it into the surrounding colour. Now I'm using that same shadow mix to add the stripes to the thorax, still avoiding that little white highlight. I'm building up a little more colour at the bottom of the thorax. This section is called the scutellum. I'm using a little of some Windsor yellow and I've added it to the left and right of the thorax and also a little bit at the top, just going over the green. I've started to add some little details here. Just where the wings join, there's a little round bit called a tegula. So I've started to paint that in green, and then I've also started to work around the eyes. The section just next to the eye, I've used Windsor yellow mixed with burnt sienna. Now here's the video of me painting the eye. I'm just using that mix of Windsor lemon and Prussian blue again, leaving a highlight on the eye, and then towards the end I'm adding the shadow mix to the right-hand side of the eye. Now I've done a whole lot of painting in the shadow mix. I've painted the hairy head and I've added the antennae. I've painted the head to look quite hairy using little tiny brush strokes and dots. I've also painted in the simple eyes, the 3 smaller eyes, and I've just done that in a mix of French ultramarine and burnt sienna, with more burnt sienna this time to make it brown. Now I've mixed some more Windsor yellow and burnt sienna, and I'm starting to add the hairs. So I'm putting hairs all around the thorax and the abdomen. They're not all the same length, there is some variation. And then once I've let that dry, I erase the pencil from underneath, but actually you do need some shadow. And I'm using a really fine brush, but I'll also just add a really light sort of shadow mix with the hairs. So I'm brushing some sort of grey hairs in as well. And then I'm actually going to mix some white with the Windsor yellow and the burnt sienna. And then I can add those hairs all over the front of the thorax and the abdomen. The challenge with this bee, and most bees, but definitely this one in particular, is that it's quite metallic but also hairy. Now I'm starting on the legs. So first thing I'm doing is putting a light green wash over all of the leg sections except for the tarsi. So then for the tarsi, I'm just painting them a light brown using the burnt sienna and French ultramarine mix. Now I'm adding some little shadows just where all the segments of the legs meet each other. And now I've painted one leg entirely just to make sure that I could get it right. So I'm working on having that metallic sheen and also adding those lovely golden hairs, again with the Windsor yellow mixed with burnt sienna and some shadows in there as well with the shadow mix. And I'm continuing to build up more intensity in the green on the legs and then adding more hairs to all of the legs. Painting the wings does really take a very steady hand, and I've just painted in all of the veins just using the brown. You can go over them, but you have to be very careful because once you start doing more layers, you may make the veins fatter, so just be careful. So there's a little cell at the top of the wing called the marginal cell, and that is often a slightly different colour. So I've just made that a nice yellowy brown, again using the burnt sienna and the Windsor yellow. And then I'm just starting to add some shading into the wings. Sometimes wings will be completely clear, but there will be some shadows. This particular species, the wings aren't clear. They are a slight greyish, brownish colour. So I'm just adding some shadowy mix along the edge of some of the veins. You can do that by putting water over the whole section, and then as it starts to dry a little bit, just dropping in some pigment. So I hope you've enjoyed this presentation, and I hope that you now are more confident about painting a bee. Just have fun with it. Research the bee is my advice. Look at lots of different photos and enjoy painting your bee. And remember, the more that we can get to know and put our bees out there for people to see, the more people will learn about them and care about them, our Australian native bees.